Welcome to the Relevance Report, where we explore the relevant stories that are shaping our world today. I'm Addie Innes, your host this week. On today's show, we'll discuss how a proposed shelter is dividing the local community, then explore how the illusion of choice contributes to educational inequity in Alberta. After, we'll recap Jasper's 2024 wildfires and check in on the community as they rebuild months later. Next, we'll review the Edmonton Elk's comeback season, from hopeful fans to unexpected victories. And finally, we'll explore local commuter concerns about navigating our city's roundabouts. Edmontonians are divided by controversy over the rezoning of a northwest industrial area to accommodate an emergency homeless shelter. Here's a story I brought on the City Council's reasoning behind the decision, as well as concerns of community members and outreach groups. In an effort to decentralize the city's homeless population, land just northwest of downtown, formerly zoned for industrial use, has now been rezoned by the city for a proposed 120-bed emergency homeless shelter to be run by the Hope Mission. However, issues have arisen with residents from bordering communities as they say they were completely blindsided by the news and left out of the decision-making process altogether. A public hearing was held by City Council on June 10th that community members were not notified nor invited to attend. After the public hearing, rezoning was passed by the City Council, and they again allegedly failed to notify the affected communities. This is a busy intersection away from hospitals, bus routes, and any other amenities. This is no place for a shelter, stated Dovercourt Community President Laura Shuchuk. Residents of the surrounding communities aren't the only ones concerned over the city's choice of location for the proposed shelter. Edmonton-based Indigenous community outreach group, Bear Claw Beaver Hills House, has voiced their disapproval of the proposed shelter site. What were they thinking when they decided upon the site? That location is out in the middle of nowhere, an industrial area. There are no buses that go out there, no hospitals close by, nothing. It might as well be Siberia that our brothers and sisters will be banished to. During the winter, we will see bodies piling up outside, bodies taken away in body bags. More amputations, more misery for the already suffering brothers and sisters. According to the city, the rezoning decision is binding, and the shelter site will be funded by the provincial government and operated by the Hope Mission. The site will provide 24/7 service with 120 beds for those in need of immediate shelter, as well as on-site health and housing support, storage facilities, and day programming. Anyone with further concerns is being encouraged to reach out to the Hope Mission directly at public.relations@hopemission.com and to report community concerns to 311. Choice is a hot topic in Alberta politics, from healthcare, bodily autonomy, and education. How does individual choice relate to education, and why are some Albertans' choices validated and prioritized over others? In this brief opinion piece, Chloe Camara reflects on misrepresentation of choice and the argument for expanding private education in Alberta.
The concept of choice is nothing new in Alberta, where emphasis on individual choice is co-opted into political rhetoric when it serves a purpose. This year, Danielle Smith released a series of polite yet sinister YouTube announcements detailing new policies affecting transgender youth and, more recently, amendments to the Bill of Rights. According to these announcements, Albertans should have the choice to refuse life-saving vaccinations. However, transgender youth certainly don't deserve a choice when it comes to gender-affirming healthcare. So, where does Albertans' right to choose their children's education fit into all of this? Supposedly funding various educational options, including private, charter, home, and public schools, gives Albertan students and their families access to learning that aligns with their needs. As private education expands in Alberta, that choice is an illusion. Data from Statistics Canada indicates that public education in Alberta is falling behind, way behind. In the 2020-2021 school year, Alberta spent nearly 14% less per student than the Canadian average, the lowest public education spend in the country. Meanwhile, Alberta currently uses public funds to subsidize accredited private schools at a rate of 70% of the base per student instructional rate. On September 18th, 2024, Danielle Smith released another YouTube video pleasantly describing the UCP's plan to build charter schools with public funds and to incentivize private education. With an already existing equity gap in Alberta, privatization is a significant barrier to students whose families can't afford the steep expenses of private academic institutions and will suffer from the poorly funded public system. High tuition fees, uniforms, and other educational costs, as well as longer commute times, are devastating for low-income students. In February 2024, the Edmonton Social Planning Council and Public Interest Alberta released a report finding that 1 in 6 children, or over 160,000 children, in Alberta are living in poverty. Charter and private schools are not mandated to accept all students, including students who can't pay the full tuition. Do they have a choice in their education? As resources are continually divested from public education, the equity gap will continue to grow. Education is not a commodity and shouldn't be treated as such.
The Jasper wildfire of July this year had a traumatic impact on Albertans, significantly changing the landscape as well as its inhabitants. In a devastating event that affected the entire national park community and the town itself, John Johnson recaps and reflects on this natural disaster.
Believe it or not, I was actually in Jasper a week before the disaster happened to film and shoot stuff for content on my YouTube channel. I was also talking about in the video how it was a relief that we are getting a lot more rain this summer because of how many wildfires happened last year. I was devastated when I read the news on CBC. The first thing I thought about was how long it would take for the affected areas to recover and what I would feel like when the park is reopened again. I may not know the whole national park by heart, but I feel connected to the place whenever I visit. I am a huge environmental science person, and a lot of my photos and photography involved Banff, Jasper, and some parts of Yoho National Park. I'm also sure that people who grew up there were much more distressed about the disaster. 10 years ago, wildfires were not that reoccurring in my experience. It just means that global warming is real, and unfortunately, we are seeing the results of it. With the amount of heat we experience every year here in Alberta, it is unavoidable that wildfires can happen. Let's just say there are also controlled fires that the park does, since Jasper has a history of controlling forest fires for hunting. But natural causes can play a role in the fires. I wish Jasper National Park a speedy recovery. No matter how many times I've been there, I feel like it's always my first time. I am probably going to reminisce and be emotional once I visit the park for reopening, since I know a lot of hiking and lookout spots by heart around the park. It was one of the first places that my family visited as immigrants, and it was a big part of my childhood because of how I was mesmerized with the whole park and its nature.
In a few weeks' time, the Grey Cup hits Vancouver. Although the Edmonton Elks didn't make the cut, hopeful energy surged through the city earlier this season. For the first time in 20 years, the Elks claimed victory in both the Labor Day Classic and the rematch against their rival team, the Calgary Stampeders. Carisha Dressler jumps back into earlier this season.
At the Labor Day rematch game on Saturday, September 7th, the Edmonton Elks had an incredible 37-16 win against the Calgary Stampeders at Commonwealth Stadium, following a 35-20 win at McMahon Stadium during the Labor Day Classic in Calgary on Monday. The Elks hadn't achieved a win in both Battle of Alberta games in 20 years, marking it a historic and long-awaited victory for the team and the city. The game's stats stated the Elks ran for 213 yards, with running back Kevin Brown leading the team with 91 yards on 12 rushes. Though it was clear the Elks were playing effectively, the Stampeders were playing exceptionally worse, which may be partly due to their rookie quarterback, 26-year-old Logan Bonner, who is in his second season with the Calgary Stampeders. The Elks' defense had 5 interceptions against the quarterback, surpassing their 4-interception execution during Monday's Labor Day game. This game win meant that for the 4th time in the last 5 games, the Elks' offense racked up at least 30 points and pushed their season total up to 385. According to Edmonton weather statistics, the city reached a temperature high of 30.9 degrees Celsius on game day, which also triggered a heat warning for the city. Despite the hot temperatures, many enthusiastic fans, including friends and families, filled the stadium. The lower bowl capacity of over 31,000 was nearly full. Among the many families attending was my own, and because of the popularity of the game, my family couldn't get 4 tickets together, but instead we were able to get 2 tickets on opposite sides of the stadium. A dominating Elks team with a large gap in points and a night of beautiful weather caused even more excitement for Elks fans and added to the already charged rivalry that exists between the two cities. Fans, including myself, left Commonwealth Stadium with a renewed, inspiring sense of joy, pride, and happiness for the team and Edmonton.
Browsed your local socials lately? Chances are you've come across disgruntled drivers complaining about roundabouts, alleging a lack of know-how in navigating them. With Edmonton's population growth on the rise, concerns are brewing as to whether driver education can keep pace. Jacob Abbott shines a light on these troubling stats and what they mean for Albertans' commuter future.
You needn't go spelunking in a cesspool of subreddits to discover disgruntled Albertans claiming it seems like nobody knows how to actually use roundabouts. I refer, of course, to the circular intersections that we all know and love, designed to improve both traffic safety and efficiency. Now, according to the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety in the United States, modern roundabouts have been shown to decrease the occurrence of injury-causing crashes by up to a whopping 80%, and for crashes altogether, as much as a 47% reduction. But for a traffic design with such staggeringly positive results, it begs a curious question for Albertans. Why, exactly, is actually navigating a roundabout not mandated in the standard Alberta Motor Association road test? See, one can't immediately help but wonder, if roundabout knowledge were tested for by the AMA, perhaps there'd be less disgruntled Albertans and more confident drivers. Looking to our neighboring province of British Columbia, we actually do have some insight into driver confidence levels regarding the intimidating circles they're poised to avoid. As recent as February of this year, an Ipsos survey revealed an abysmally low 29% of drivers feel confident navigating multi-lane roundabouts. Dropping down to its single-lane sister, the figure spikes to 57%, but that's still grim, especially considering these interesting intersections may soon become impossible to avoid, if not due to their increasing prevalence. There are less roundabouts in BC than Alberta, but continued complaints in this province might lead one to presume the figures here may not be so different. As a pertinent local example here in Edmonton, the mere fact of traffic lights persisting in a roundabout, such as the one that connects Grote Road to St. Albert Trail, screams a lack of confidence to me as far as the city itself is concerned, especially when things get busy. It's tempting to incessantly bash Canada's motor associations, but the roundabout is actually a relatively recent phenomenon for Canadians. First appearing in the United Kingdom in the 1950s, modern roundabouts didn't actually penetrate North American borders until 40 years later, the first round cropping up in places like Nevada and Ontario. For Edmontonians, however, they'd have to wait until the turn of the century for these circular marvels. That said, it's been well over 2 decades since, and you'd think by now our province's road test would include a mandatory roundabout evaluation, at the very least. But I suppose this is all a roundabout way of saying this. We simply need more driver education, in whatever form that needs to take. While this is definitely not to say navigating roundabouts should not be mandated in our province's road test, as the data indicates it probably should, it's doubtful a panacea. Unfortunately, this just isn't the type of issue that fizzles into oblivion without a human cost. It will get worse with scale, and I'm not sure that Edmontonians, and Albertans at large for that matter, getting their practice in on actual roundabouts is an ideal means to an ideal end. I'm sure eventually they'll become so common that navigating them is second nature to everyone, but if we can, through creative and committed methods of consciousness raising, prevent even a single collision, I think we've a collective moral obligation to try.
Thanks for joining us for the Relevance Report. This week's episode was produced by me, Addie Innes, Chloe Camara, John Johnson, Carissa Dreschler, and Jacob Abbott. The show was edited by John Johnson and Carissa Dreschler. The show's supervising producer is Sheena Rossiter. Additional studio supervision by Sasha Stanojevic. This episode was produced as part of the BCSC 206 Introduction to Audio and Video course in the fall 2024 semester. This course is part of the Bachelor of Communication Studies program in the Department of Communication at MacEwan University. The show was edited and produced out of the MacEwan Media Production Studio. Our theme music is called Buzzing by Kaylee Lambert. Additional tracks are Night Detective by Amaski, Solitude, Dark Ambient Electronic by Luca Francia, Mellow Future Bass, Bounce on It by Alex Grohl, Groovy Ambient Funk by Mood Mode, and Creative Technology Showreel by Pump Up the Mind. Logo design for this podcast is by Sasha Stanojevic. I'm Addie Innes, your host for this week's episode. This podcast was recorded on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral home of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Dakota Sioux. We acknowledge this territory is home to the Métis settlements and Métis nations of Alberta, Districts 9, 10, and 11, with the historical North Saskatchewan River Territory. Don't forget to subscribe to the Relevance Report on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and review. It really helps people find the show. Please join us next week as we report the relevant stories that are shaping our world.